I'm Lisa Pickering, and welcome to CITV's Press Talk. Here's the most recent news and information from the government of Bermuda.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, especially to the media that's here this afternoon, and thanks for joining myself as the chairman of the Blue Ribbon Panel and one of my panel members, Barclay Simmons. You will see that the minister did appoint 6 members. There are 2 here today. Our view was that this was sufficient in terms of conveying our message this afternoon, and it was not necessary to have everyone here. Also, as you can see, we're in familiar surroundings for all of you. And again, it's about optics, it's about perception, and we have no issues with us doing this, this press conference in this room, and I trust that that meets as well with your concurrence as well. So again, let's move on to our press statement. I will say as well that following this press statement, we will take questions from each of you. And following this, I will, as chairman of the Blue Ribbon Panel, I will be sending out both a copy of the press statement and the full report soon after this is over. The Blue Ribbon Panel press statement, February the 8th, 2017. The Blue Ribbon Panel was appointed by the Minister of Finance, the Honorable E.T. Bob Richards, to carry out an independent review on the Bermuda Airport redevelopment project. In this context, the panel was required to render an opinion, subject to the published terms of reference, on whether the proposal is commercially sound and/or commercially reasonable and supportive of the government's long-term strategic objectives. The panel was asked to consider the government's strategic objectives of long-term sustainability, increasing traffic volume and revenue, addressing structural needs of the airport terminal, and improving customer experience. If the transaction incentivizes the concessionaire to support the government's long-term objectives that were just mentioned. If on balance, the deal is within the parameters for similar 3P airport concession transactions in the market. And finally, if the transaction provides for the government to share in upside benefits and mitigates downside risk. Our review has considered several aspects of the transaction, which included valuation, cost and returns, transparency and communications, risk and risk transfer, acceptable returns to debt and equity providers, competitive advantages, fair and unfair, national debt, fiscal deficits, and sovereign credit ratings and suitability of commercial counterparties. The panel met and read substantial information and documents that were provided to us. And we interviewed many professionals who have been part of this transaction and parties who are opposed to the transaction. Our report represents analyses and conclusions on a wide range of questions raised with respect to this project. Some of the questions are as follows. Are there $810 million or $1.4 million of hidden costs being incurred on the project or on the airport? Is there a total risk transfer under the government-to-government proposal of the cost of construction? Are the gaps identified in the Deloitte report filled? Is the negotiated process better than a competitive tender process? Would the credit rating of Bermuda be negatively affected by additional debt? How can this plan be considered commercially viable if the United Kingdom has already gone on record and decided that the Cayman Island proposal failed to deliver value for money? How does the cost of the proposed G2G project compare to other airport projects? Is a 30-year term for the contract an appropriate term? Has this proposal been shrouded in a process that lacks transparency? Here are some highlights of our findings and conclusions. The additional costs noted in question 1 above are based on assumptions that are not generally accepted corporate finance methods, are not supported by several independent experts, and do not fully consider both sides of the picture of costs and revenues. 2, the conclusion of the panel as regards to risk and risk transfer is that the risk transfer of the cost of construction in this proposal is better than and would normally be achieved, albeit not 100%. 3. In response to question 4 above, the panel concluded that the approach of government to enter into a negotiated agreement instead of competitive tendering was reasonable. In response to the 30-year term, the panel concluded that this term was reasonable and consistent with similar projects. 5. In response to the question above with respect to the process lacking transparency, the panel's view is that the entire project would have benefited from much clearer disclosure of the transactions, its terms, and the participants at a much earlier stage. The panel's findings and conclusions are supported by detailed analysis in our full report, which is attached to this press statement and will come out, as I said earlier, later on today. In summary, the Blue Ribbon panel has found that this transaction is commercially sound and reasonable and likely to meet the government's stated objectives of long-term sustainability, increased traffic volume and revenue, while effectively providing for the structural needs for the airport. We have also found that its terms are within the parameters for similar P3 airport projects, and in some cases, this project exceeds those norms positively. In closing, it should be noted that our analysis has revealed the challenges associated with this project. Legitimate concerns have been expressed as to the process, the representations made to the Parliament and the people of Bermuda, and the significant opportunity transferred to a private company for an extended period of time. It is the overall panel's view, going off the script, that in our view, it is a good deal. It is not perfect, but it's a good deal. Respectfully, the Blue Ribbon panel. I'll now open the floor for questions.
Would it have benefited yourselves to have access to that information, and would you like to have seen it?
No, that would not have benefited us. As I referred to earlier in this statement, that we had volumes of material. A lot of it was financial information that provided us to reach the conclusion that we had. And I would like to add that since you've raised the question of the financial model, that like yourself, I did hear those comments as well. I would like to say that in the industry of infrastructure and leading practice in that area, it is actually quite unusual for a project agreement to be shared in the public domain before it is complete. And it's also unusual to have the model because that's supported or dictated by the closing. So that's sort of a more fuller response, but no, it did not inhibit us in carrying out our work.
That's one more question as well. When the appointment was made, there was some criticism or questioning of the independence of the panel itself, predominantly from the Progressive Labour Party. What would you say to those comments about the independence of this review?
There's no doubt in our minds, notwithstanding the views of others, that this is an independent panel. We were not influenced by anyone in the government, and for that matter, those that we met and interviewed. It was independent. It was independent in every way, shape, and form. And I think when you read our full report, I think you will see that there's evidence and support for what I'm saying. Barty, would you like to add anything to what I've said?
In terms of independence?
Independence, yes.
Well, thank you, first of all. Thank you for spending the time with us today. No, I think there were a wide range of political views represented in the panel. We interviewed people from a cross-section of the community, people that supported the project, people that did not support the project, and the report will show where we were certainly educated by many of the views. What we've tried to do is to isolate the transaction from some of the process. And I think that's an important distinction that in any environment you would have to make. But you know, I think it's it's ultimately, you know, likely to happen that when you're in a political process, people are going to criticize from a political standpoint. But this is not a political panel.
Any other?
Just one more carrying on. So, you mentioned in just the summary here that it would have benefited from a much clearer disclosure of the transaction terms and the participants at a much earlier stage. At who were you pinpointing, not necessarily the blame, but what should have been done and who should it have been done by?
Again, I don't want to in my role as an infrastructure professional, I could go at length on that. But again, I always come back to leading practice, that it is also very important, whether it be the government or the private sector that is sponsoring a project, to have well laid out and sound communication strategies. And that should start at the very beginning, like everything else on this transaction. And again, it would be best to follow that whole strategic communication process, not just at the closing of the transaction, but throughout the construction and to the end. So I'm not directing it at any particular person, but in terms of, you know, pick out of that what you wish. But I think I'll start from and answer it in that way. And so therefore, again, being more specific, the public sector, and again, it's recited in our report and expanded in our report, that communication, a sound communication strategy probably would have dealt with some of the disquiet that we saw in certain constituents on this transaction.
You've been watching Press Talk right here on CITV. Join us next time for your government's news and information. I'm Lisa Pickering.